thanks to everyone. This has been an extraordinary forum. Thank you, especially Oksana, and everyone who organized this. So I'm told that this closing panel, and we had a little bit of a discussion over lunch, we're supposed to be going from a more political to a professional view, and looking at a perspective of sovereignty and responsibility. So a few thoughts before we get into the discussion from the real experts, of which I am not one. I'd just like to start with a general observation, and this has been a really terrific round of discussion, and very frank. But you know, as is often the case lately when I'm sitting in fora and discussing Ukraine, I feel like I've been at a conference on Russia. And I thought the focus was going to be Ukraine, but so often we end up looking at Ukraine only through the lens of Russia. And Ukrainians end up, as many have said here, being an object, not a subject. And it made me think, just listening to the discussion earlier today and yesterday, that maybe as an outcome of this forum, we need to sort of let Ukraine be Ukraine moment, like we had in 1982 with Poland, Poland. Just to remind ourselves of what we're talking about and what the real focus of attention needs to be, the future of Ukraine for Ukrainians with its international friends and partners in support. So I'd like to get back to Ukraine, and I'd like to start by sharing a quote with you. And I do it, I guess, with a little bit of humility, because I know there's such expertise in this room, so much academic expertise. And what I want to do is to just share a quote that comes from this erudite publication, What's on Kyiv. And I suppose I should have What's on Lviv in my hand, but I don't. But I want to use some words that came out of the editor's note in the 3rd edition of What's on Kyiv. She writes about heroes of today shaping the country's tomorrow. She talks about the drive and spirit of a new generation of Ukrainians for a new future. She says what sets them apart is their belief in their project, the belief in the dream, the ability to bring others on board with that dream, well-adjusted individuals, unafraid to take chances, who believe in their own future. Well, that's quite a vision, and I think from what we've heard over the last few days, it's one that I think all of us in this room would share. And I don't mean to be simplistic in starting with that sort of quote, but I want to use it as a starting point, because I think that it's very important to have our discussions about sovereignty and responsibility and all the important things we're talking about here today, based on ground truth that brings real life and real people back to the foundational backdrop for our discussion. And that came up a little bit in the last panel. It's about people. It's not just about issues and not about geopolitics. So a couple of issues that I'd like to touch on. Conflict, resettlement, resolution in an era of hybrid war. Well, we know from yesterday that this term hybrid itself is contested. People talked full spectrum, multidimensional, whatever you want to call it. We know what it is. Subversion, targeted killings, hybrid, kinetic, economic and energy coercion, even corruption. Corruption, that insidious Trojan horse of hybrid warfare. And it makes me think, as I'm a defense person, a little bit of Clausewitz's famous dictum that war is the continuation of politics by other means. I think that in the 21st century, it's fair to say that hybrid war is a continuation of politics by all means. And why is this relevant to our discussion? Because I think it poses real challenges for defining end of conflict, no matter about peace. And it helps inform what we need to do going forward. First, an end of conflict. Well, traditionally, we would know what an end of conflict means: surrender, withdrawal, troops, demilitarization. But these steps and actions, I have to say, seem hardly sufficient and not even entirely irrelevant if we looked at the context that we're faced with in Ukraine. Because we know that politics, social media, Twitter-enabled, 24/7 in the 21st century politics is never going to stop. So if hybrid war is a sort of political warfare, we have to be much smarter, deal with the issues and challenges in a much more comprehensive and encompassing manner. And with the confidence and clarity of what it means to aspire to be a responsible, accountable, democratic, sovereign state based on principles and values. So there's been a lot of talk here about being real, about being clear-headed. And so in that spirit, I would argue that it's perhaps time to shift emphasis and focus from a simple survive, and this came up yesterday, to a higher level of ambition and confidence, like the one expressed in the editorial, and the one we've heard expressed around this room over the last 2 days. An empowered and an empowering vision of sovereignty. I know this sounds a little bit rhetorical, but it is, in fact, only a restatement of the essence of Ukraine's own clear and determined declaration of its Euro-Atlantic vision, its vocation, its ambitions based on standards and principles. And as part of that commitment, a commitment to fundamental reform to get there. So, what does this all mean about sovereignty and responsibility? Well, what I'd like to talk about for one moment now is about the foundational principle of sovereignty as responsibility. And this isn't my term, this was coined first in the mid-90s by Francis Dang. What does sovereignty as responsibility mean? Well, it means good government, it means good governance, it means social cohesion, it means inclusivity by design, it means robust and fair, strong and accountable institutions, the rule of law, human rights. Governance as a matter of managing conflict and building stability. And this has come up a lot in the last couple of panels I've been interested to hear. Undertaking the difficult, painstaking internal reforms to change and strengthen institutions, to make them independent of personalities and politics, and to turn them into foundational, trusted institutions, which are seen to be equitable and fair, accessible to all, accountable, and where decision-making, I think most importantly, decision-making from policy, development, and debate to implementation is transparent and it's traceable, so people know what's going on, who's doing it, and why. So reform has come up a lot in the last days, and we've heard it being said that if Ukraine doesn't follow through on reform, then Ukraine won't win, current conflict or any other. And I think that it's important to kind of keep that in mind, but not to despair, but really to spur us on. And what does this mean about going forward if you define sovereignty as responsibility? Well, in an era when war is waged politically against the state and the people, and where it's designed to erode the social contract between government and the people, the social cohesion amongst people, to confuse and to divide, to dispirit, and if not to conquer, to subjugate, and if even not to subjugate, to get people to sort of self-censor and deny themselves a future that they want, you have to offer people an honest, clear way forward. Good governance in Ukraine, including and beginning with the problem of corruption, is what government, from the president through to the Rada, civil service, defense and security forces that I work with, they owe Ukrainians because of what people fought and sacrificed for. It can be also a beacon of hope to the population of the occupied territory and a compelling argument for reconciliation and reintegration because it offers them a future hope of what a Ukraine could look like, what their Ukraine could look like, what their Ukraine is, because these are Ukrainian citizens, of course. I think it is the compelling narrative, but it needs to be put into practice and evident in daily life. And then that can begin to combat and at least challenge the fake facts, the propaganda of others. The restoration of sovereignty in its fullest form. And sovereignty, in my view, is not just about territory and geography and maps, however they're drawn. It's about the responsibility of government to its citizens and the quality of that relationship and the social contract. So, contrary to what I heard yesterday, and I must say I didn't disagree with much of what I've heard around here, I don't think that geography determines Ukraine's future. I think it's a shaper, it's a factor in that future. It's not a definitive driver. It's the democratic project. It's the values project. It's the aspiration of a better future, of a democratic future, of accountable government. In short, sovereignty as responsibility. Thank you.